Hi, I'm Bill Spalding. Welcome to WCS Money Tutorials. I recently did a video on the 30-year TIPS, short for Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, and why I thought it was one of the best investments for 2023. In 2024, it may still be one of the best investments, and the next auction is in February. If you want to learn more details about TIPS, check out my other video on TIPS, which provides more basic information. A link is provided in the description below.
TIPS are issued only in electronic format, with maturity terms of 5, 10, or 30 years.
As a hedge against inflation, the principal of TIPS is adjusted according to the Consumer Price Index. Interest is paid every 6 months. The interest amount is determined by the principal, adjusted for inflation, multiplied by the interest rate, which is fixed for the life of the bond. At maturity, the greater of the adjusted principal or the original par value is paid. The coupon rate for TIPS is low compared to other treasuries, because much of the return is in the form of principal adjustments. A primary advantage of TIPS is that they offer a real rate that will not change over the life of the bond, while the nominal rate for Treasury notes and bonds could drop below the inflation rate, resulting in less purchasing power. You can add the coupon rate to the inflation rate to get an approximate value of the annual increase in your return. As you can see in this example for a 5-year TIPS, the total return is slightly less than the coupon rate plus inflation rate, compounded annually for 5 years. To compare the yield of TIPS to Treasuries, you must consider the inflation rate plus the real yield. The nominal yield of most bonds and other Treasuries consists of a real yield plus a portion of the yield that compensates for inflation. But unlike with TIPS, this portion never changes. When inflation increases, the real yield of most bonds decreases. The total yield of TIPS equals the coupon interest rate plus the rate of the principal adjustment according to inflation. The break-even inflation rate is the rate of inflation that equalizes the total return of TIPS with other treasuries or other bonds with coupons paying a nominal yield. When the inflation rate exceeds the break-even yield, then the real yield of TIPS will exceed the real yield of most other bonds.
The fixed interest rate is determined by auction.
Duration measures the sensitivity of the market price of a bond to changes in interest rates. Duration is the weighted average maturity time of all payments. Graphically, the duration of a bond can be envisioned as a fulcrum placed under a seesaw so as to balance the weights of the present values of the coupon payments and the principal payment. Both a longer term maturity and a lower coupon rate results in a longer duration. A longer duration means that a security could be sold for a higher capital gain when interest rates decline. Although duration is a useful measure, the duration of TIPS cannot be measured. Duration depends on future cash flows, and because both the interest payments and the principal payment depend on the adjustments to principal, which, in turn, depend on future inflation, there is no way to measure the duration of TIPS. Nonetheless, it is certain that the duration is long, since the term of the bond is 30 years, and most of the cash flow occurs at maturity. This table illustrates the potential for capital gains. Because future cash flows for TIPS is unknowable, I displayed what the theoretical prices would be for the 30-year Treasury bond when interest rates decline from 4% to 0.25%. As you can see here, if interest rates decline to 1% or less, then you will have a capital gain exceeding 75%. You may even double your money. This could happen within a few years. How long would it take for the stock market to double? Because the duration of 30-year TIPS is even longer, the price should increase even more when interest rates decline. But even an interest rate decline of only 1 or 2% can result in capital gains of 20% to 45%.
TIPS are not subject to state or local income taxes, but they are subject to annual federal taxes on both the semi-annual coupon payments and the adjustments to principal. The tax and adjustments to principal is often referred to as phantom income because you must pay the tax annually even though the principal adjustments are not received until the security is sold or matures. Therefore, it is best to hold TIPS in tax-advantaged retirement accounts.
This summarizes how taxable income is calculated.
You should receive Form 1099 OID from your custodian showing the amount of interest paid in Box 2 and adjustments to principal in Box 8. Although it is not necessary, some custodians may choose to report the annual payment of interest separately. If interest payments are not reported on Form 1099 OID, then the interest income is reported on Form 1099 INT in Box 3. This is the auction schedule for Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, showing the auctions for original issues and for reopenings. Reopenings are simply another sale of a previously issued security, having the same maturity date and coupon interest rate as the original issue, but with a different issue date and purchase price.
Now, let's go over the details of the February calendar for the 30-year TIPS. The auction will take place on February 22nd. The issue date is the 29th. The dated date is the 15th of the month. This is an important date because it is the date when interest starts accruing, and the reference CPI index for this date will serve as the base for determining principal adjustments, which will also determine the amount of interest earned. When you buy TIPS, you must also pay for the accrued interest plus the accrued principal from the dated date to the issue date. You will get the payment for accrued interest back with the first interest payment, but you will only get the accrued principal back either when you sell the bond in the secondary market or at maturity.
You can buy TIPS either at TreasuryDirect or through your broker.
When buying TIPS at TreasuryDirect, you can only buy new issues through auctions. You can buy before the announcement, and you can buy in multiples of $100 rather than the $1,000 most brokers require. However, to sell in the secondary marketplace, you must transfer the securities to a broker. Buying TIPS at a broker makes it easier to sell. You can also buy TIPS for your retirement account, which would allow you to avoid the annual taxes. However, the minimum purchase is usually $1,000, and purchases must be in multiples of $1,000. Brokers only provide the option to buy newly issued TIPS for the 1 week between the announcement date and the auction date, so you should mark your calendar to remind yourself of the upcoming dates if you wish to buy. This may be your last chance for a long time to get a good yield in TIPS. The next auction for the 30-year TIPS is in August 2024, but rates are expected to decline by then, possibly by as much as 0.5%, and it will probably be beneficial to have some inflation protection in your portfolio. This was the federal debt in August 2023. This is the debt on January 31st, 2024. You can clearly see it has grown enormously. The future price of TIPS will also depend on future inflation. If inflation is high, then prices will also be high. Although inflation in the past has typically been around 2%, which is the Federal Reserve's preferred rate, it will probably be higher in the future because there will be some need to pay off the enormous federal debt, especially when politicians are reluctant to raise taxes. Moreover, because of that debt, if another crisis occurs, such as another pandemic, then the federal government will have no choice but to print more money, since raising taxes then would be calamitous. And when calamities occur, TIPS will also benefit from the flight to quality, when people minimize risk by selling risky securities, then using the proceeds to buy safe securities. U.S. Treasuries are the safest haven, so they benefit the most from the flight to quality. So here's a summary of the advantages of buying 30-year TIPS. No credit default risk, exemption from state and local taxes, and interest and principal steadily increase. You can profit from decreasing interest rates from the flight to quality during economic turmoil. And you have the potential to earn substantial capital gains, possibly even doubling your money within a short time. Or hold to lock in a decent interest rate and protection against inflation for 30 years. Thank you very much for your time. If you liked my video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I would appreciate any suggestions, so please leave them in the comments below. Check out my website at thismatter.com for more than 850 in-depth fundamental tutorials in personal finance, investments, and economics. Check out my books on money at williamspalding.com. Thank you.